Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaRevelis and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link down in the description to the page, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. My name is Joshua Revelis. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down with fellow enthusiasts to talk about what's going on in the technology, business, and gaming world. I hope you guys enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Revelis. I'm your host as usual. And looks like we're talking about Tesla again because that's what you guys voted on the page. So we're going to talk about it. So why are we talking about the Model 3 specifically? So for most of you, I'm assuming you probably don't know what the Model 3 is, but I'll just give you a quick rundown. The Model 3 was basically one of Tesla's newest model cars that came out about like a year or two ago. Roughly, I'm guesstimating a little bit. But it was meant to be an entry-level car for Tesla. Obviously, yes, its price tag was still above $40,000. And obviously, you still had different variations of it and which one you want to pay for. So we run into some issues because not only is the Model 3, initially, it wasn't as cheap as we wanted it to be, but it was still cheaper than the Roadster and the Model X. So we just took it, or the Model S. But now, last week, they announced that the Model 3 is going to be starting off, its base model is $35,000 clean. Obviously, that doesn't include things like automated driving and things like that, but we'll talk about that later in the episode. But specifically, the base model by itself, if you don't buy any of that stuff and just buy the car, it's $35,000. You're probably asking yourselves, why is this important? So, I think the main reason this is very important for Tesla specifically, or we'll talk about it a little bit more later on about like the impact on the electric vehicle market as a whole. But this is a milestone Tesla has been trying to push for a while because that's what they wanted to do with the Model 3. They wanted to make the Model 3 more affordable, and that their overall goal was to get it to $35,000, which is good, but there are some things that I don't know how to feel about it, especially because what they had to do to get there. So, we mentioned the price. We know that's $35,000 now. That's its base. What does that include? So, its base range is 220 miles. So, that's the $35,000 version. Like base, you get 220 miles for sure, and it can go up to 130 miles per hour. Obviously, this doesn't include like the premium interior or things like that. It's mainly stock everything. I would say, I'm not going to say cheaply made, but it's not as luxury compared to the other ones, clearly. And obviously, like, they did bring back the longer range version of the base model. So obviously, you can get more range too. You just have to spend more money, clearly. But this is where we run into an issue because you're probably wondering yourself, okay, how did they get the car to be $35,000? Because as a car company, that is kind of hard to do, unless if you already make the car pretty cheap, like Honda Accords and Honda Civics and things like that. Naturally, it's pretty easy to get them cheap, but how did they get the Model 3 to be cheap? So this is where we have to really think about it because it is kind of, depending on how you view the situation, it kind of is crappy a little bit, but from a business standpoint, it makes sense. Obviously, they're trying to save money. As a result of making the Model 3 cheaper, they had to cut down on many actual retail stores that sell the Tesla. So you know those little Tesla stores inside of the malls? Yeah, basically they're getting rid of most of those that weren't really that successful. Obviously, if they're getting rid of retail stores, that only means that they're going to switch to online only, which in hindsight isn't a bad idea, especially because the internet seems like, well, obviously the internet's going to be the future, but with the car market, that becomes a bigger problem because if you're trying to sell cars on the internet like you're trying to sell stuff on Amazon, it's not going to work the same way. Let me explain. Clearly, when it comes to testing a car, or buying cars specifically, you want to test drive it. But if you're buying the cars online, you don't get to test drive the car. Basically, you just have to wait till the car arrives to your house, and then, basically for Tesla specifically, there's a website where you would download a PDF for a checklist to make sure that everything's right with the Tesla. And if something, obviously isn't to Tesla standards, that you can decline the delivery, and then they have to go fix it and then send it back. But you get what I'm saying is that does create a little bit of more of a problematic issue, because you don't get to see how the car feels before you get it. You just have to buy on the assumption that, oh, this is something I like. But obviously this creates an issue with cars, because traditionally that's how people they buy cars specifically, is you have to test it. You have to see how you feel inside of it, because that's the whole point, is not everybody's going to feel comfortable driving the same car. That's just not true. Nobody is going to feel the exact same way when driving a car. Like, my cousin, he's over 6 feet, but, obviously I'm shorter than him. Clearly I'm like 5'6", 5'7", but the sense that he's going to feel a little bit more uncomfortable driving my car, because when I had it, he felt a little bit uncomfortable because it was too small. But that's, because he's a bigger guy. So you get the point. Not everybody's going to like the way how a car feels. Like, I have my friend Cameron, who's a valet, so he gets to test drive a lot of luxury cars because he obviously parks them. And he drove a Tesla, and for him, he didn't like the feel of it. He thought, to him, it didn't feel comfortable to drive around. He just said it felt wonky. But you get the point. Not everybody's going to feel the same way driving a car, and that's the whole point of test driving cars, is to see how it feels, so that if you like it, if you want to walk away with it, then clearly you can just write the check then and there and then get on your way. But this becomes an issue with Tesla, because the fact that you want to do online only is a very dumb move. I understand that from a business standpoint, it saves a lot of money, but you're still not in that position to be doing those kind of things, if you get what I'm saying. I'm not going to say that Tesla, doesn't have the brand recognition to do that, but given that Tesla is already in a little bit of a wonky position in terms of financially, that I'm not going to say that they don't make a profit, but in the sense that, they still have some financial issues, but that's not really a good way to attract customers, because if you're trying to get the ICE drivers, basically like gasoline cars, to switch over to electric vehicles, that's not a good way to do it, because you're basically telling them, hey, you either buy this on the internet and don't get to test drive it, and tough luck. And obviously they're like, okay, so why would I spend more money on this car when I can go to a dealership, test drive this car, it's cheaper and it feels better, and I can actually see it in front of me and walk away with it right now instead of waiting. Because that's another problem is, we still run into the issue of Tesla, delivering cars, because obviously they're not like Ford and all them, where they already have giant factories to pump out tons of cars every year. Obviously they have improved. I'm not going to say they haven't, but we're still not manufacturing at a good rate. That's pretty much the whole problem. And there are people that ordered the Model 3 when it first came out, that pre-ordered it, and they still haven't gotten it. It's been about 2 years. And barely now, the fact that they decided to lower it and more people are starting to buy it, those people are kind of pissed, because they paid a much higher price for a similar car and they still haven't gotten it. And yet these other people are probably going to get it in 2 to 4 weeks, because that's what it says on the website. It says 2 to 4 week delivery. So obviously Elon had to go on Twitter and tell them, like, all the people that, already pre-ordered it beforehand, they will be the first ones to get the first batches of these Model 3s. But going back to the point of, even though if you get nothing fancy on it, it's $35,000, that still doesn't mean the car exactly is going to be $35,000, because obviously you get the free black coloring for free, because for some reason that's the free color, but every other color you have to spend an extra $1,500 or $2,000 to get that color. So if you want white or red, then yeah, you have to shell out an extra close to $2,000 for it. If you want custom rims or bigger wheels specifically, then yeah, you have to spend more. And if you want the autonomous driving, which the autonomous driving, they did make it cheaper, because originally when the Model 3 came out, it was $7,000 and then they dropped it to $3,000, but it's not as advanced as the people that spent $7,000 on it. There's obviously some features that were taken away and it was dumbed down, and they pushed it over to the upgraded package of the autonomous driving. But that got cheaper too, because instead of, I think it was like $8,000 or somewhere in that range, like don't quote me on it, because I actually don't remember it exactly, but they made it 5,000, and that has more of the features. But clearly, you know, you keep adding this up and you start noticing, okay, this isn't a $35,000 car. It's going to be more than that, clearly. And we're going to end up probably pushing in the range of, I'd say, close to 50 grand. And that's basically just the base model. That's not including if you want more range, because like I mentioned before in the Tesla and Rivian episode, the main issue with EV cars is range. Now, granted, when they announced the Model 3 being $35,000, I went on Twitter, and a lot of people did, because they were shocked about this news and they started talking about it. And I ran into a little bit of debate with this guy on it. And it was interesting because he's saying that based on statistics, most of the people in the US don't do long trips. They usually don't do 200 plus miles on their car, usually in a month. That's what he says. However, I make the argument that, and I think this argument really applies to everything, especially if you're buying something, I'd rather not need it and have it than need it and not have it. What does that mean? So specifically, I'm going to make a quick connection with like the headphone jack. Obviously, you know, on phones, people really wanted the headphone jack, and they were really pissed that it got taken away. They really wanted it because they have a ton of headphones that have the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, and they can't use it. So that would be an instance of needing it but not having it. And then in the sense of, say, Samsung phones, they have an SD card slot. Obviously, it's not necessary because obviously, you know, phones already have a good amount of storage and you can just buy more storage, but it's something that's there, so, you know, you don't have to buy more storage, but at the same time, it's something that you might not need, but it's good to have it there just in case. So that would be an instance that I would say is how you would apply that, especially when you apply it to cars specifically. The main thing people want, or, you know, I'll make the argument specifically in my situation, I would prefer more range on a car. Obviously, yeah, some people, I will agree, there's some people that don't even do 200 miles daily or even do multiple trips a month that need more than 200 plus miles. But that doesn't mean that it's not useful, because, you know, I'd rather have the security of mind and be able to do that trip without worrying about it. And then it also runs into the issue with the electric cars and the grid. Obviously, the grid is referring to the charging network and things like that, because people are saying that, oh, you know, Tesla can't really expand the grid because then they have to build more facilities to house energy, and then that would, like, you know, we'd have to spend more on renewable energy and things like that. But that's what I'm saying is, isn't that the whole point? If you're trying to push for electric cars, isn't that the point, that you can have enough energy to provide a better charging network? Because if you expand where the charging places can be, then clearly that resolves a lot of those range issues, because obviously you can just go to one of those charging stations and just charge up. And then, you know, that doesn't even include how long it takes, which, you know, we have to take that into consideration. Like, you know, if we ever in the future of this country, or in the world specifically, if we ever, all of us just switch to electric cars, obviously, yeah, that wait time is going to suck, because the charging stations take about 30 minutes. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to spend 30 minutes charging my car, because, you know, that kind of sounds stupid. Obviously, some people are saying, well, you could just charge it at your home. Well, what happens if you're not at home and you're doing a trip? Like, you can't just go back to your house and charge it. And then some people are saying, well, you could just take a detour. Why do I need to take a detour? My gas car didn't need me to take detours. I could just go straight to my destination without any issue. You get the point, right? That it's all these excuses trying to justify this when there's no reason to justify it. It needs to be there. I get it, the technology still hasn't expanded, and I will say that's a fair point, because we still haven't gotten to that point technologically that we can expand the grid in a sufficient manner, especially charging times, because the second that we can figure out how to get the charging times to be a lot, I'm talking about at least 10 minutes, 10 to at least 20 minutes of full tank, then we have something going, because then more people will be inclined. But that also means that, you know, if more people switch to it, obviously, you know, if the demand increases, then you need more supply. That means you need more stations, because you don't want people crowding up, like, you know, EV charging stations, because there's going to be huge lines, and we're talking about like 20 to 30, even 40 minutes. Well, currently right now it's like 30 to 40 to an hour for each person. you get the point. We run into an issue. Even though, yes, you save a ton of money in comparison, but that wait time is still very crucial, and it's very important that we need to lower that. And before some people say that, oh, we don't have enough renewable energy to make that possible. So let me get this straight. We have places like California and Arizona that have very vast areas of open land that you can easily install solar panels in. Obviously, I know solar panels are expensive, but let me get to my point. But you have this very vast area, direct sunlight constantly, more than close to 24 hours a day. And you mean to tell me we can't put solar panels there, which would make logistical sense, because if it's getting tons of sunlight as is, and like for a long period of time, I don't see what the problem is, especially because, that open area, nobody's doing anything there. So it would make logistical sense to build solar panels in those areas because they clearly can generate a lot of energy. And then same with windmills. Like I've seen a lot of places outside of Lubbock that have a ton of windmills. There's especially going at least an hour out of Lubbock, I see 10 of those suckers. So there's clearly space that you can do it. You can expand the renewable energy. Obviously, yes, you have to build more facilities to house all that energy, but realistically, that shouldn't be an issue if you try hard enough. And that's overall the point is, are we trying to settle for mediocrity is what I'm asking. Because if people are trying to justify the 200 base range, then we really need to evaluate, are we settling for mediocrity? And I know this sounds like I'm going off topic, but we need to consider this, especially because the Model 3 is now $35,000. We have to ask ourselves, what does this mean for the electric vehicle market as a whole? Overall, it is the more affordable, yet better in compared to many other EV cars in that price range. It's far better, especially if you compare it to the Volt, which absolute garbage range. I don't even know how that's close to 30 grand, and it only gets 100 miles of range, somewhere in that. But you get the point, is that for the price, it is the best hands down. But there are compromises behind it. Obviously, yes, you don't get the luxury interior. You don't get, you can't really get another paint job unless if you want to spend more. You can't get the autonomous driving or the upgraded version of it. You can't get the special features that come with it. You can't get the heated seats. There's a lot of stuff that has to be traded for a cheaper car. And I agree with Tesla in the sense that, that's the point. That's why they made a cheaper Model 3. The standard model is just an entry car, because it's the same thing with phones. How there's always a 64 gigabyte, a 120 gigabyte, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, yes, the cheaper storage option, or the less storage option specifically, is going to be cheaper. It will be. But obviously, you'll have less storage. And that's kind of the problem. And if you want more, you obviously pay more. But, we run into the issue with cars, especially when, yes, you made the car cheaper. Bravo. But the fact that you made it cheaper now makes people need to consider it, because people will have to look at it, and they're going to look at it a lot more. I'd say they're going to be nitpicking the heck out of it more, especially when you try to compare it to a Honda Accord or Honda Civic in the $26,000 price range, which is probably an EV car is the closest to it, but you're going to get a lot of nitpicking because people are going to compare the interiors, they're going to compare features. There's a lot of stuff that, you have to try to convince gasoline or gas-powered car drivers specifically, you have to try to convince them. And that's not easy when your car, you're charging at least 10 grand more, and its range is less. If the gas car can do double the range, that's going to make people question it. Why should I buy it? And I agree with them, because, that's legit questions you have to ask yourself. If the gas car is, say, $10,000 less and it gets more than double the range, why shouldn't I buy it compared to the electric car? And I can easily fill it up a lot easier than an electric car. Obviously, yes, with the Teslas, specifically Teslas, you can get the home charging station, but, you have to get an electrician to come in and install it. And there's just a lot of more technical things you have to do. And, for those consumers, it's not an easy sell because they're going to be thinking about all those things beforehand. And my only concern is if Tesla ever, I'd say if they could ever get the Model 3 to 30,000 and at least keep it in the same range and everything, I think then yes, many people will consider it more, because that's the overall goal. Is if Tesla wants to have electric cars in your possession, then obviously, yeah, they have to make them cheaper to compete, because obviously, yes, for the time being, they are considered luxury cars. And I will make the argument that, that's how electric cars should be viewed as, is electric cars, especially like the ones like the Rivian and the ones that Porsche are making, and obviously Tesla's coming out with their new Roadster and their new Model Y, which it's going to be an SUV, but you get the point. They are luxury cars. They're not supposed to be meant for the consumer, even though that's how Tesla is trying to present themselves sometimes, is they're trying to make sure that it's in the hands of all consumers. But we run into that issue of, is cost and practicality, are they equal? Because if they're not, then we have a serious problem, because obviously, yes, I'll agree. For $35,000, I probably still wouldn't buy a Model 3, especially in the sense that, the Model 3 did lower price. Like, its price dropped. So, what's to say if I buy it now and then later down the line it doesn't drop even more? You get the point, is that I spent more and then these people were able to get the same car but for less. And they basically use me as a test subject, basically as a guinea pig. And that's how a lot of these Model 3 owners or current Model 3 owners are feeling about this situation, because basically people that buy the Model 3 now are getting it for cheaper and they're pissed about it. And I agree with them. Like, I believe the Model 3 should have been that way. Obviously, yes, they had to cut some corners to make it that way. But yeah, I still think the Model 3, if they really wanted it to be really more competitive, then yes, I believe that it should have been $35,000 from the start without any hesitation. And then specifically now that the Model 3 is $35,000, its sales went up a lot in California, about like 30% right now, if I'm correct. I need to fact check my information to be sure about this, because this is a kind of a big deal, especially if we're talking about Tesla's impact, especially with the Model 3. Like, based on what I'm seeing, dominates sales in California, capturing 30% of alternative fuel vehicles sold. So that's a good amount. Like 30%, that's not bad, especially if 30% is one type of car. So yeah, clearly it's increasing. We get it. But, we still run into the issues of asking ourselves, practicality versus cost. And, my opinion still stands. I probably still wouldn't buy one, because until it becomes the base range is at least 350 miles, I shouldn't pay more to get more range. That's not like, you get what I'm saying? That's like, obviously, yes, I'm not going to say it's like paying for more storage, but in a sense, that's like asking if, hey, you want this feature, like say on a phone, you want the headphone jack back, yeah, just pay like an extra $200 to $500. Obviously, some people will call you crazy and they'll be like, hell no. And they'll just stick with what they got. But for some people, if they feel like they need to, then yeah, they'll just shell out the extra bread. And I think that's kind of messed up in a sense, because you're basically giving them an ultimatum. Like, you either want the more range or you don't. And I think it's kind of crappy, because you're limiting what a person could do with their car, especially when the car is a very big investment. When cars naturally, most people when they buy cars, they naturally hold on to them for like about 7 years in the US specifically. So if you're asking somebody that they're going to be stuck with that car for 7 years, they have to learn how to manage it, and they have to learn how to work around its shortcomings for 7 years. Obviously, yes, most people, realistically, specifically with that, most people probably wouldn't want to deal with that crap. They wouldn't. And I probably wouldn't either. So that's what I'm saying. We need to get to the point that we can expand the grid, because clearly we can. We just, for some reason, we choose not to. And obviously make the cars have more range. Like, you can't tell me Tesla can't innovate. They've innovated multiple times. We've seen how they've innovated. Like, that's how they Like, you literally have one of the most innovative human beings running your company. And you mean to tell me that we can't innovate to figure out how to get a 350 base range on a car? Like, come on, guys. Like, I know you, like, because obviously, yeah, we've seen it. They have 325. I'd be fine with 325 as a base too. I'm not saying it needs to be 350 exactly, but at least in the 300s would make people consider it a lot more, because, you know, that's what normal cars or gasoline powered cars do. Like, they're naturally over 300 miles of range easily without any issues. So that's why I'm saying that we need to think about that. Obviously, yes, I still agree with Tesla dropping the price of the Model 3, and I think it's a great move, and I think this is clearly going to drop the sales even more because now it's more affordable and more people want to jump into it. But my advice is to still be more cautious about those kind of things, because there's still some things that haven't been addressed. But, you know, especially given the sense that they're switching to online only, it is a very, very, I say it's a very dumb idea, especially because the car market doesn't really operate that way. And I get it that you want to innovate and that you want to make changes to how people buy cars, but that's not really a good way to do it, especially when there's just a natural tradition of test driving a car before you buy it. You got to feel the car. And the fact that you're taking that away from people, you know, I think that scares people off, clearly, especially when you're closing retail stores, which obviously cost people jobs as well, which, you know, sucks, obviously. And then, you know, obviously they're not closing all of them. They're only closing the ones that didn't really do so well. I think probably specifically in Dallas, I think the one in North Park is going to do fine, especially because you have a lot of people going in there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they keep it or they don't, but we'll probably find out when I get home. So, because obviously they already started closing them, so we'll find out. But that's really all I got for this episode. So going into for next week's episode, because obviously it's spring break, so let's talk about it. So for spring break's episode, I'm just going to tell you guys this now. I'm not going to put a poll on the Instagram page specifically for it because, you know, I already have a topic in mind. It's going to be about a specific company that I like and that I am very interested in talking about. And obviously, like I mentioned before, I'm going to be talking with my friend Ryan, that we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about it, especially because we do have a good connection with the company to a degree and as being consumers of it. So I really hope that you guys actually, you know, tune into that episode because it will be very interesting. And that's really all I got for you guys for this week. I know this is obviously, we're still working on a lot of logistical things behind the scenes for the show. I do have some things planned and upcoming, and there will be a very special surprise for next week's episode. So you guys don't have to listen to it at the end, but it's very special. So I'll leave it at that for now. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. Like, if I'm being real with you guys, I'm really in a good mood, especially because I passed my math test this morning. And finally, because, you know, I bombed it last week and I was just bummed out. And then we did the retakes today and I destroyed that test with 100. But anyways, that's a whole nother thing that's going off topic. But I hope you guys have a wonderful week. I love you guys to death. You guys take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys next week. I love you guys.